Hi, I'm the daughter they praised in public but erased in private. The one whose childhood photo they still display, right next to the sister who leaked my therapy notes. They said it was about protecting the family's name, but behind closed doors, they turned my voice into a weapon. I was disinvited from board meetings, stripped from projects I built, and when I spoke up, they didn't just silence me, they tried to unmake me, so I disappeared. And when I came back, I didn't knock. Why would a family work so hard to destroy one of their own? And what happens when she decides not to burn quietly, but to echo? It started with an invitation, one that arrived not through a phone call or a warm message, but a sterile white envelope embossed with my father's insignia. I opened it at the kitchen counter in silence. It wasn't even handwritten, just a printed note from his secretary, letting me know there'd be a family dinner on Saturday, sharp at 6, at the estate. No pleasantries, no hope to see you, just instructions, as if I were still part of the old order. I stood there, fingers trembling slightly, reading it again. I hadn't seen him in nearly 3 years, not since the last time he'd managed to humiliate me in front of the entire family during Christmas brunch. My sister Caroline still sent birthday texts, but even those had grown shorter each year. Still, I found myself ironing a navy blue blouse that night, one with a neckline high enough not to draw attention. I wasn't trying to make a statement, just blend in, say little, and get out before dessert. The day of the dinner, autumn had just begun to scratch at the trees in suburban Maryland. The drive to the estate felt longer than it used to. Or maybe I was just older, more aware of what I'd chosen to stay away from. His house loomed the same, grand columns, pristine lawn, the American flag standing vigilant by the door. Everything about the place screamed legacy. And for so long, I had tried to belong to it. Caroline opened the door, her lipstick perfect, her smile brittle. "You look, well," she said, eyes flicking briefly to the hem of my skirt as if measuring dignity. Dinner was already set. China gleamed under the chandelier. My father sat at the head of the table, flanked by Caroline and her husband Davis. No one stood to greet me. I took the last seat, the one closest to the wall. The room smelled of rosemary and quiet judgment. We made small talk. Caroline about her youngest getting into a magnet program, Davis about his firm merging with someone important. I nodded, smiled politely, let their voices coat the room like varnish. Then my father cleared his throat and turned to me. "So," he began, swirling his wine, "still pursuing the noble art of couch philosophy, are we?" Laughter broke like glass. Davis chuckled. Caroline gave a tight smile. Even the butler seemed to blink differently. I swallowed. Hard. They didn't know. Of course they didn't, because I had never told them. Not about the years overseas, the operations buried beneath classification, the late nights translating intercepted chatter into strategies that would shape foreign policy. I sat there, steady as his words bounced off my ribs. I didn't come here to explain myself. I came to remember why I stopped coming at all. The meal moved on. Barely. Silence began to stretch longer than the laughter had. Caroline noticed the chill first, her smile faltering. Davis looked up, eyes narrowing at the hallway. The doorbell rang. Everyone froze. No one was expecting anyone else. The butler answered, and a voice echoed through the marble foyer. "Director Robert Kelman, Central Intelligence." Footsteps. Measured, firm. Then he appeared, flanked by a younger agent who kept glancing at a tablet. "Good evening," Kelman said, nodding at the table before walking directly to me. He stood upright, heels together, and saluted. "Madam Speaker," he said, voice low but unmistakable. My father's hand slipped, his wine glass shattered against the hardwood. No one spoke. Caroline's mouth hung slightly open. Davis looked as though he'd forgotten how to breathe. I rose slowly, keeping my posture composed. "Director," I replied, returning the gesture with a nod. "I didn't expect you so soon." He handed me a sealed folder, then turned to leave. Silence lingered. I sat again, folded the folder into my lap without opening it, and picked up my fork. No one dared say another word. There was no joy in the moment, just a long, quiet exhale. I'd spent years needing this, craving their acknowledgement, their respect, their apology. And yet, now that I had it, all I wanted was peace. I didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't cry. I let the weight of their silence speak for me, and for the first time in years, I felt the quiet fall in my favor. Dinner didn't resume so much as it limped forward. The clink of silverware resumed as if on cue, but no one met my eyes. The chairs creaked awkwardly, and conversations that once ran over each other now trailed like forgotten notes on a dusty piano. The wine kept flowing, not out of celebration, but necessity. My father didn't speak. Not directly to me, anyway. He kept his gaze firmly on his plate, as if by ignoring my presence he could erase what had just occurred. Callista offered a tight smile from across the room, her hand lightly resting on her husband's wrist, signaling him to say nothing. My nephews and nieces, full-grown now, glanced at me like I was something between a myth and a mistake. A servant appeared behind me. "Miss, your seat has been adjusted." I followed him past the long table, away from the center, toward a smaller extension near the kitchen entrance. It was technically still the same dining room, but this table wasn't for guests. It was for overflow, for children, for help. And now, apparently for me, I sat without protest. The cushions sagged slightly, worn from disuse. I smiled to myself. They'll never say sorry. They'll just rearrange the chairs. My plate arrived last, no steam. The roast had been picked clean. What remained were bones, dry edges of gristle, and the skin others scraped aside. I stared at it for a long moment. The smell wasn't unappealing. In fact, it brought something back. I was 7 again. The kitchen was colder then, the lights harsher. My brothers had eaten first, then Callista. I waited, folding my hands so tight they turned pale, until my mother nodded that I could join. Bones, bits of bread, carrots with their skins still on. I didn't cry then either. I just packed a slice of meat into a napkin, tucked it into my coat pocket, and left it behind the porch steps, where the stray dog, with eyes as wary as mine, would sniff it out each night. Some things don't change. Only the table gets more expensive. Voices floated from the main table. "It was the respectful thing to do," Callista said to our cousin, loud enough for me to hear. "We couldn't just not invite her. It would have looked petty." So there it was. The truth wasn't behind their tight smiles or their overcooked courtesies. It sat plainly in that one sentence. I was decoration, proof of grace, a charity invite, something to polish the family's public image. I chewed a piece of bread crust, harder than it should have been, and let the salt settle under my tongue. Even mercy can feel like mockery when it's given for show. That's when I knew. I didn't want back in. I didn't want their apologies. I didn't even want their seats. I just wanted out, not in anger, not as a protest, just a quiet, dignified withdrawal from a place that had long stopped being mine. I stood reaching for my glass. A refill, I told myself. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. As I passed the wall of portraits, I took my time. There was my father in his navy whites, Callista in her law school regalia, the twins with their basketball trophies. But not me. I used to think absence from those walls was the greatest insult. Now I saw it differently. It wasn't absence. It was freedom. I touched the empty wall beside the kitchen door. Maybe someday they'd hang me there, in uniform, or behind a podium, or maybe in a photo no one could explain, or maybe they wouldn't. And maybe that was okay. Next time they see me, I whispered to no one, it'll be because they have no choice. The apartment was as I left it, dim, cluttered, and honest. The overhead bulb flickered once before settling into its usual warm buzz, casting gentle shadows over the walls lined with books, unpaid bills, and handwritten sticky notes I never seemed to throw away. I dropped my bag by the door and kicked off my heels, the stiff silence wrapping around me like an old cardigan. No voices, no glares, no orchestras of silverware clinking against porcelain, just the hum of the fridge and the weight of everything I didn't say at that dinner. In the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself. Mascara had bled slightly under my eyes, not from crying, but from holding everything in. My jaw still clenched unconsciously. I took a deep breath and wiped the smudge with a cold cloth, watching the reflections settle into something steadier. You survived, I whispered to myself. Again. No portraits hung in this apartment. No oil paintings of proud ancestors, no posed holiday photos. Just a crooked frame holding a scrap of paper with a quote I found in a used bookstore. Be the person you needed when you were younger. I had taped it up with the same hope I'd once poured into letters I never sent. I crossed the room and sat in front of the small wooden chest tucked beneath my window. Inside was a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Its handle stuck slightly, as if resisting the memory. When it gave way, it revealed a neat stack of envelopes, each addressed to Dad, none bearing a stamp. They were milestones dressed in ink. The night I got into law school. My first time speaking at a national rally. The night I won that legal case everyone said was unwinnable. And lonelier nights, too. My first Christmas alone. The evening I found a lump and waited a week before telling anyone. Pages filled with triumph and fear, sealed and stored because somewhere inside me, I'd decided rejection on paper was safer than rejection in real life. I lifted one letter, unfolded it slowly. The writing was smaller then, like I was trying to make myself take up less space, even on the page. Dear Dad, I made it. I stood in front of 300 people today and they listened. I wish you could have seen it. I had forgotten that part of me. The girl who still wanted him to look up and be proud. The phone rang. At first I thought it was a telemarketer, but the screen flashed Aunt Marion. I hesitated. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Hi, I said, surprised by the rasp in my voice. She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing. Then finally, I'm sorry. I waited. Her voice cracked. I should have told you sooner. I used to visit the estate more often, back when you still sent letters. I never sent them, I replied instinctively. No, she said gently. You left them in the mailbox out front. I saw Callista collecting them. I thought, I assumed she was delivering them, but I started noticing torn pieces in the trash bin. Your father never read them. My chest hollowed out. Callista intercepted them? She read them. Once I caught her laughing at one. A kind of silence fell between us, heavy and final. I should have felt angry, maybe screamed, but all I felt was displacement. Like a chapter of my life had been quietly rewritten, and I'd only just gotten the original version back. They made me believe I walked away, I murmured. But they locked the door first. Aunt Marion sniffled. You deserved better. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. After we hung up, I turned toward my desk. The small lamp cast a golden ring over my keyboard. My fingers hovered for a moment, then started typing. It wasn't a letter this time. It was a speech. I was scheduled to speak at a town hall that weekend, and though I'd planned to talk about zoning reform, my fingers had other ideas. I wrote about silenced voices, about rewriting history in real time, about truth being messier than facts. If they silenced me in private, I typed, I'll speak where they can't edit. I wasn't naming names, not yet, but I embedded my story between statistics and policy, in metaphors and legal frameworks. I carved my grief into structure, tucked my betrayal beneath clauses. I turned my ache into ammunition, and I realized, as I saved the document and closed the laptop, that I wasn't seeking their validation anymore. I was taking back the pen. The hum of the Capitol building always had a certain rhythm, like a quiet metronome ticking behind the grand gestures of politics. That morning, I had been nestled in my office, deep in preparation for a policy briefing about federal housing equity, the kind of legislation no one paid attention to until it failed. Then Lauren, my assistant, poked her head in. Your father's downstairs. He says he's here to talk. The words hung in the air like smoke. Richard, no call, no email, just here. Send him up, I said, smoothing down my blazer, already anticipating the weight of his presence. He arrived minutes later, flowers in hand, the kind sold at airports. His suit was too crisp, his smile stretched too wide. "Thought I'd stop by, like adults," he said. I motioned toward the chair across from me and offered tea. He accepted with a nod but didn't touch the cup when I brought it. "Beautiful office," he said, eyes grazing over the framed bill I co-authored last year. "It does the job," I replied. He leaned in. "I caught your speech at the town hall. Eloquent. You always did have a way with words." I almost smiled, but then he added, "You might consider weaving in more family history next time. A shared narrative makes people feel safer." And there it was. "You mean like ours?" I asked, folding my hands. He shrugged. "Just a thought." I leaned back, watching him. "You admired the stage, not the woman who stood on it." His expression flickered, but only for a second. He recovered with the efficiency of a man used to skipping apologies. Then came the envelope. "There's a donor event next week. Your sister's headlining. I think it would help the family to show unity." Unity. A word he wielded like a leash. I skimmed the invite and set it down. "So, it's not about my work, it's about cleaning up your optics." He didn't respond, just smoothed his pant leg and stared at the flowers, as if unsure why he'd brought them. "I don't do background roles anymore," I said, my voice even. He exhaled, loud and rehearsed. "Your sister. She struggles. Tell her not to use my silence as a shield. I won't be silent forever." He stood. "You sound just like your mother when she was angry." "Then maybe you should have listened to her too." He said nothing more, just walked out with the envelope still on the desk and the tea untouched. When the door closed, I turned the lock, both literally and figuratively. For the first time in years, I felt a clean kind of silence settle in. Not the kind that smothered, but the kind that cleared space. Callista's message arrived just as I was sipping my first glass of wine that evening. The screen lit up with a brightness too sharp for the dim warmth of my apartment. "Let's have a grown-up night. My treat. Just sisters." I stared at it longer than I should have. Her tone, all casual charm, didn't fool me. It was the kind of invitation that felt like a peace treaty issued after a war no one agreed was over. But something in me, it wasn't hope, not anymore, something like curiosity, maybe, made me say yes. The bistro she picked sat on a cobbled street in Georgetown, its windows glowing golden against the dark. Inside, the air smelled of garlic and aged wood, familiar in the way old houses smell after too many quiet apologies. She waved when I walked in, already seated, already sipping. Her lipstick was perfect. Her hair was swept into that effortless twist that probably took her stylist an hour. For a moment, it was like we were kids again, sneaking snacks from the fridge, giggling in stolen moments between our parents' sharp silences, but only for a moment. "You look grounded," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "You look rehearsed," I replied, half smiling. Let her guess whether I meant it as a joke. We ordered. She chose for me, like always. Tagliatelle with truffle cream, knowing I hate cream sauces but assuming, perhaps, I'd be too polite to say no. She started light, like a seasoned interrogator. Compliments wrapped in concern. Admiring my recent op-ed, praising my natural presence, then slipping in, "You know, you could really shine if you weren't so buried behind all that committee work." I blinked. "I like the work." "Of course. But what if you didn't have to fight so hard for visibility? We could get you an advisory role, safer, easier, with better press." There it was. She wasn't offering a hand, she was offering a leash. "I'm not a light bulb you can screw into a socket that flatters you," I said, stirring my wine. "And I don't do roles where I can't speak." Callista blinked once, then smiled too quickly. "You're misreading me. This is support." "No," I said. "This is containment." She didn't deny it, just moved on. From her handbag, she produced a velvet box. Small, white, the kind meant for jewelry you can't return. "It's from Mom," she said. "Thought you should have it." Inside sat a pearl brooch, oval, silver-backed. I knew it, knew every tiny flaw in its surface from years of watching it pinned to our grandmother's coat on Sundays. "You sure this is from Mom?" I asked. She faltered. "Well, it was in storage, but yes," she mentioned. "No," I cut in, setting the box down. "She didn't. This was promised to me when I turned 21. I guess that memory got misplaced, like the rest of me." Callista's smile thinned. "You're being dramatic." I leaned back. "You're being predictable." The waiter came then, and we both retreated into the temporary civility of paid service. We finished our plates in silence, the kind that's too full to be peaceful. Later, back home, I opened the hallway closet. Inside were all the unopened gifts from birthdays, Christmases, and obligatory celebrations, neatly stacked, wrapped in glossy paper. None opened. Not because I was spiteful, but because I always knew what they were. Guilt in ribbons, silence in a box. I added the brooch to the pile. In the bathroom, I wiped off my lipstick, catching my own eyes in the mirror. Tired, but not worn out. Changed, but not smaller. For the first time, I said it aloud. I don't need them to see me anymore. I see me. And then, with the firmness of ritual, I took a yellow sticky note, wrote 3 words, and pressed it to the glass. "Don't dim down." The camera lights had dimmed, but my heart was still lit with a quiet burn. That night after the forum, I had walked back to my apartment with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. People had listened. Not out of obligation or pedigree, but because my words mattered. The senator's handshake had been firm. "I'd like to circulate that memo," he'd said, nodding toward the draft I'd referenced during the panel. "We need clarity like that in the conversation." I'd smiled, grateful, and promised to email it by nightfall, which I did, with care. What I didn't do was prepare for war. The next morning, my inbox was on fire. Twitter threads dissected my memo, but not the one I'd sent. This version had my name, my formatting, but not my words. Someone had lifted a paragraph about federal incentives and reworded it to sound like an attack on state governance. It was subtle, clever, damning. Commentators pounced. Overreach. Another coastal elite playing kingmaker. Threats followed. Dozens of them. I felt the familiar squeeze in my throat, that small voice whispering, "You should have known they'd never let you rise quietly." But this time, I didn't retreat. I called a friend at the tech division of the Senate. "Can you trace edit history from the shared document folder?" I asked. An hour later, I had my answer. The altered version had been accessed and exported by a junior aide affiliated with the Callista Foundation's Youth Policy Board, one of their people. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and I'd received it loud and clear. That afternoon, the damage escalated. News sites began running a suspiciously timed series of op-eds questioning the authenticity of my resume. One quoted an anonymous source close to the family, alleging I'd exaggerated my role in several past intelligence initiatives. Another piece questioned whether I'd even graduated summa cum laude. I didn't need to connect the dots. I knew the PR firm's name, knew it like a scar. Callista's husband had it on retainer during her campaign's rebranding year. Polished, precise character erosion was their specialty. I sat on the edge of my bed, fingers steepled under my chin. I felt no tears, only heat. Rage had lost its drama for me. It now arrived clean, surgical. I opened my laptop. I didn't write a defense. I wrote a declaration. The first sentence, every time I was told I didn't belong, I took notes. I poured my story into that document, not as a victim, not as an accuser, but as a woman finally reclaiming authorship. I described my path through institutions that labeled me too soft-spoken, too unpolished, too much. I wrote about the nights I had packed my own meals after family dinners left me with nothing. I wrote about the silence that had once gagged me. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The weight of truth would be louder than any headline. By dawn, I had confirmed my live interview slot on Morning Line, a national news show that prided itself on first-hand truths. No handlers, no scripts. The sky outside my window was bruised with pre-sunlight, soft lavender edging into gray. I pulled on my navy blazer, not the one they'd seen me wear at family dinners, but the one I'd bought with my first paycheck, stitched with quiet defiance. As I stepped onto the quiet street toward the studio, I felt something unusual. Not fear, not anger, but a strange, clean clarity. They had tried to cut me down, but I had bled ink. The morning light filtered through my office blinds like an apology that arrived too late. My coffee had long gone cold, but I kept sipping, letting the bitterness ground me. 2 days had passed since the national interview aired. 2 days of unexpected solidarity, inboxes full of thank you notes, social media teeming with stories from women I'd never met but suddenly felt bonded to. For the first time in years, I believed I had managed to say something true out loud and be heard. It was the quiet afterward that unnerved me. Like standing on a dock when the ocean goes still, you sense something rising beneath. I'd just begun mapping out a youth mentorship initiative when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. This time I answered. "Is this still your number?" The voice was strained, older than I remembered. My former therapist. She didn't waste time. "I retired last year. I shredded nearly everything, but I kept backups for legal reasons. Someone accessed the old archives. I don't know how, but a session from 3 years ago was leaked." My stomach dropped. "I'm so sorry, I never—" Her voice broke. I thanked her, calmly, too calmly. Then I hung up and opened the blog link someone had already forwarded. There it was, a cherry-picked paragraph from a session when I'd been at my lowest, titled, "Capital's Rising Star Admits to Delusional Burdens." They even quoted my musings about the feeling of invisibility in my family, twisting them into claims of mental instability. The piece cited an anonymous source close to the family. There was only one person who fit that profile and had motive. Callista. I stared at the screen, then at my reflection in the black monitor. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Stoic, yes, but stripped raw. I called my attorney first. Then, against all better judgment, I dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring. "I assume you've seen it?" I asked. A long pause. "I don't read those things." "That's not denial, that's avoidance." She sighed. "Don't be dramatic. It's politics, darling, you know that." "No. It's sabotage." Silence again. And then the line went dead. I couldn't afford to be shattered. So I channeled the fury into focus. The knock on my office door startled me. Elliot, a board member from the nonprofit I co-founded, stepped in, face drawn. "We need to talk," he said. Of course. He laid it out clean. Major donors were pulling out, citing my public controversies. The youth policy mentorship program we were weeks away from launching was now dangling on financial thread. "I'm not blaming you," he said gently. "But the board's getting nervous. They think you're becoming polarizing." I laughed. Sharp. Bitter. Translation. I stopped playing polite. He didn't deny it. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Tell the board I'll fund the first 6 months myself." His eyes widened. "That's generous." "No, that's necessary." They had used philanthropy like a leash. I just hadn't seen the collar until it chafed. That night, I didn't sleep. I wrote instead an open letter. Honest, angry, clarifying. Titled, "When They Strip You Bare, Stand Naked with Purpose." Published by The Atlantic, it was part confession, part call to arms. I wrote it for every woman who had been told her voice was too loud, her trauma too messy, her truth too complicated. By morning, it was viral. By afternoon, I was hosting the first roundtable with 10 young women of color in my office. They spoke nervously at first, then boldly. Ideas flowed, plans formed. And for the first time in days, I smiled from somewhere real. As we wrapped up, one of the girls said quietly, "I thought people like you didn't get bruised." I met her gaze. "Oh, we do," I said. "But bruises remind us where we still feel." They picked the wrong woman to unravel. The drive to Easton was uneventful, but my stomach twisted the closer we got. Trees blurred past the window while my friend Layla, a lawyer with a quiet backbone, sat beside me scanning headlines on her phone. I had invited her as my +1, but we both knew it was a precaution. My mother's voice, syrupy and strained over the phone, still echoed in my ear. "Just dinner, darling. Let's bring the family together." When that woman used the word together, it was usually a euphemism for controlled. The estate glowed in the soft light of Sunday dusk, candles flickering in each window like a stage set. Inside, the table was dressed in pristine linen and polished silver, but the air buzzed with unspoken tension. Callista offered a tight smile and reached for a hug. I gave her my shoulder. Richard barely looked up from his decanter. "Welcome," my mother said too brightly, kissing my cheek with perfunctory grace. "It's just us tonight, family." I glanced at Layla, who nodded slightly, her calm presence anchoring me. We took our seats, Layla beside me, slightly back, as if to signal her neutrality. That was fine. I wasn't expecting a fight. I just didn't want to be ambushed without a witness. Dinner began with clinking glasses and hollow chatter. My brother narrated stock prices like bedtime stories, while Callista relayed political gossip with the precision of someone auditioning for a cable news segment. I mostly listened, occasionally smiled, occasionally sipped. Then came dessert. Callista dabbed her lips with a napkin and looked across the table, her tone shifting like a well-rehearsed monologue. "I want to say something," she began, voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. "Things have spiraled lately. I've had time to reflect." My spoon paused over creme brulee. "I never meant to let things get so ugly," she said, eyes darting toward our mother for approval. "You've been going through a lot, and I regret not being more sensitive." The table fell silent. "And," she added, "I never imagined that your past struggles would be weaponized like this. It wasn't fair to you." Struggles, not the leaks, not the therapy notes. Struggles. I exhaled, slowly. "You're not apologizing," I said, setting my spoon down. "You're reframing." Her face twitched. "I'm trying to make peace. You're trying to control the narrative before it controls you." My mother interjected. "Girls." "No," I said. "Let's not girls this. Let's woman this." Layla shifted subtly. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table. "Do you remember our call last month?" I asked Callista. She stared, stiff. "I don't recall." I tapped the screen. Her voice crackled out through the speaker. "If we tank the memo subtly, no one will trace it, but she'll get the message." Silence devoured the room. Our mother stood abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. Richard froze, lips pursed. My brother stared into his wine glass like it might contain a portal. "I didn't mean," Callista stammered. "You did," I said. "And now everyone else knows too." Layla reached over and turned off the playback. My mother whispered, "Please, not here." "Not like this." I rose. "You wanted a family dinner? This is how our family eats. In silence, in sabotage, in spectacle." Layla followed suit, collecting her coat. I walked toward the door, each step shedding a layer of residue I hadn't realized I still carried. At the gates, I ordered a car. As we waited, I posted the recording with one sentence. "Truth doesn't need a seat at your table to speak." The night air felt cooler than I remembered. And freer. The vibration of my phone woke me before the sun could. It hadn't stopped buzzing since the night before. 312 missed calls, a number I couldn't even process, scrolling through a tidal wave of notifications, news alerts, messages, emails. Every platform had my name on it, and not because I'd cured anything or passed a bill, because I played a recording. I sat up slowly, knees bent, eyes grainy from too little sleep and too much thought. My living room looked the same, plants still thirsty, coffee mug from yesterday untouched, but something in the air felt split, like the silence that follows a gunshot. Still, tense, and loud in a way only quiet could be. CNN's Chiron ran the headline, "Easton Family Rift Goes Public, Callista Under Scrutiny." My sister's polished face hovered on the screen, replaying an older campaign video while anchors debated whether I had overstepped familial ethics. One pundit called me calculating, another called me brave. I didn't care what they called me, I just wanted them to stop calling. My brother texted simply, "You should have kept it in the family." I didn't answer. There was no family left to keep it in. I spent the morning scrolling through social media, not to feed the drama, but to understand its shape. There were GIFs, memes, outrage, applause. Someone had slowed the recording to make it sound like a courtroom confession. Someone else started a #TellYourTruth trend. A small part of me marveled at how quickly the personal becomes public. The larger part of me just felt tired. By noon, I received a private message from a woman I didn't know. "Thank you, I've been silent too long." I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling. At 2:00 p.m., my lawyer called. "We've had a few disturbing messages come through the public inquiry forms. I recommend a protective order, at least for now." "Are they credible?" "They're vague, but they're loud." I nodded, mostly to myself. "Okay, let's file." The ethics committee at work requested a formal conversation about my recent media engagement. They used terms like reputational risk and temporary leave. I listened, then muted the Zoom and stared at myself in the small video box. I didn't look scandalous. I looked like someone trying very hard not to cry on camera. By 4:00 p.m., I declined a panel invitation for a national summit on women in transparency. I didn't want to be on a stage. I wanted air. Later that evening, my old professor from law school emailed me. "You did what few ever do. Looked them in the eye and told the truth. That matters." I read the line 5 times, then closed the laptop again. My therapist fit me in for a last-minute phone session. I told her everything. "They've painted me unstable," I said. "They're projecting their fear onto your clarity," she replied. "You didn't set the fire. You just refused to burn with it." I let that settle into my chest. Before dinner, I opened the group text with my family. I didn't say anything, just held my finger over the thread, clicked "Leave conversation," and exhaled. For the first time in a week, I turned off the TV. Then I opened a browser window and searched flights to Colorado. I hadn't been back since I was 25, hiking solo to clear my head after a difficult breakup. I remembered the pine air, the echo of boots on gravel, how even my silence felt listened to there. I picked a flight for Friday. 1 carry-on, no plans beyond the mountains. That night, I made tea and sat by the window. I didn't speak. I didn't write. I didn't answer the door when someone knocked. Because for once, silence didn't ache. It exhaled. The cabin sat at the edge of a ridge, looking out over the Colorado Rockies like it had been waiting for someone to notice it. I stepped out onto the frost-dusted porch that first morning, wrapped in a wool sweater and silence. There was no buzzing phone, no blinking alerts, just my breath, visible and deliberate. Leadville didn't need to impress. At 10,000 feet above sea level, the air forced your lungs to slow down, your thoughts to stretch out. I hiked the old trails behind the cabin every day, boots crunching over frozen pine needles, letting the burn in my calves replace the ache in my chest. Each morning, I journaled before the sun thawed the windows. "This is how you learn to live with the echoes," I wrote, by listening to them without trying to reply. In a town this quiet, even regrets walked softer. Midweek, I picked up a bundle of forwarded mail from the town's tiny post office. Most of it was junk or political mailers, ironic given the reason I was here. But buried between them was a small envelope, hand-addressed and yellowed at the corners. The return address was my grandmother's. She died in 2007. Inside was a letter, dated 1994. I recognized her looping cursive instantly. She had written it but never sent it. In it, she spoke of the silence she'd kept in her own family, the shame she carried for not speaking up when her sister had been disowned for marrying someone outside tradition. She closed with a line I hadn't expected. "If you ever feel torn between being kind and being honest, choose courage over comfort." I reread that line until the ink seemed to bleed. Maybe love skips a generation to remind us how deeply it mattered. That afternoon, I met an older man named Joe on the trail. Gray beard, crooked walking stick, and a kindness that felt earned. We chatted at a rocky overlook. He shared how he'd once been forced out of his medical job for whistleblowing about unsafe practices in a private hospital. They tried to say I ruined the family name, he said, sipping water. But the truth doesn't ruin anything. It just takes the shine off lies. His story didn't mirror mine exactly, but the texture was the same. I found myself asking if he regretted speaking up. He smiled. Every day, he said, and not once. That evening, I pulled out my phone and opened the email invite to the ethics roundtable I had ignored weeks earlier. I wrote back, "Yes, I'll join, with one condition, no scripts. Sometimes redemption isn't in being welcomed back, it's in returning on your terms." On my final morning, I hiked to the highest trailhead I could manage. It took hours, my breath ragged in the thin air. At the summit, I stood alone. The wind howled, but I was steady. I pulled out my phone and hit send on the RSVP. Then I turned, looking back down the trail I'd climbed, both literal and metaphorical. Healing wasn't hiding. It was climbing high enough to see the path I chose. By the time I reached the bottom, I knew I wasn't going back. I was moving forward. Washington greeted me with a filtered chill. Early winter in D.C. always carried a sense of ceremonial pretense, like even the weather wore its resume. This time, I booked my own hotel. No family home, no chauffeur, just a quiet room near DuPont Circle and the silence I had earned. I wasn't here to perform. I wasn't here to belong. I came to understand. The ethics roundtable convened in a vaulted chamber, all mahogany and microphone wires. I slid into my chair, second row from center, with a new steadiness. Around me, the voices were familiar. Retired senators with grandfathered morals, policy analysts speaking in careful hypotheticals. The script hadn't changed, but I had. About 40 minutes in, a gray-haired man made a veiled swipe. Grassroots narratives are emotionally compelling, but what we need are proven policy architects. Before I could respond, a younger panelist, mid-30s, sharp eyes, cut in. Actually, one of the most innovative frameworks came from field policy journals, written anonymously at the time, but it was hers. She turned and nodded to me. Later, by the coffee cart, she introduced herself. "Dana, you don't know me, but your old notes made their way to me after you stepped back. They changed the way I structured our state's ethics training." I managed a smile. Not the polite kind. The earned kind. I never knew the embers I left behind would help light someone else's fire. The moderator opened the floor for questions. A familiar voice rang out. Thomas. Former colleague. Still allergic to nuance. "I'm curious," he said smoothly. "In light of your recent press, do you still feel qualified to speak on integrity in public office?" I let the silence settle. Then, integrity isn't about never falling. It's about refusing to stay silent while the floor is burning. I didn't show up today to defend myself. I came to ask why so many still think silence is the honorable choice. No applause. Just the slow shift of respect. The most powerful confrontation is the one you don't personalize. As the session ended, a program assistant handed me an embossed dinner invite. I thanked her, folded it into my coat, and walked outside instead. Downtown D.C. had the cold, clean hush of early December. I kept walking, past the monuments, past the snaking lines of tourists, until the steps of the Lincoln Memorial rose ahead. I climbed them slowly, breath rising in little clouds, no fanfare, no closure speech, just me. Closure didn't need an audience, just a boundary and a beginning. And as I sat on those cold steps, staring into the lit hush of the Capitol, I realized I was no longer searching for anything, just choosing what came next. Washington in late December carried a hush, not of peace but pause, the kind right before something breaks. I sat at my desk, lights low, the city glittering beyond my apartment window like it owed me nothing. On the screen, a sealed folder labeled plainly, Ethics Memo 2016 to 2020, unredacted. Inside, audio files, internal emails, board meeting transcripts, every timestamp, every word, curated and undeniable. With a calm I'd earned, I uploaded the files to a secure portal, sent them anonymously to the board of the Easton Foundation, then CC'd a selection of investigative journalists, the ones who hadn't stopped when I went quiet. I didn't hit send out of anger. I did it out of mercy. Not for them, but for myself. I didn't burn the bridge. I built a brighter one, then lit the match. The first headline hit 12 hours later. By the third, I stopped counting. By Thursday, 3 executives were suspended. Statements were issued in legalese so cautious they sounded allergic to verbs. My inbox overflowed. Old colleagues offering sympathy, some apologies, others offered only silence. And in truth, I preferred it that way. One email stood out. From The Reframe, a podcast I admired. "We'd like to feature your story, but only if you want to tell it." I said yes, on one condition: no edits, no filters, no balancing perspectives. They agreed. Justice isn't sweet, it's steady, and when it arrives, it doesn't knock, it enters. I met Callista at a cafe near DuPont. Neutral ground, but the air was charged. She wore a soft gray coat, not quite apology-colored, but trying. "I read your memo," she said. I didn't nod. I didn't want it to end this way. "But you made peace with it anyway," I replied. She looked away. No tears, no denial, just that familiar Easton blankness. "You chose your silence," I said, gently but firmly. "I chose my story." There were no raised voices, no dramatic exits, just me, standing, coat buttoned, heart clear. I left before the check came. Didn't look back. That night, I printed a letter. It was addressed to Dana, the woman from the ethics roundtable who had stood up and cited me without knowing I needed to hear it. Inside the envelope, my original resignation letter. Unedited notes from a project that never saw light. And one sentence in ink: "May you never doubt what you already know." I sealed it, mailed it, and returned to my kitchen window. Outside, the snow had begun to fall. DC hushed itself again, but this time, it didn't feel like fear, it felt like grace. Some women disappear quietly. I chose to echo. There's a moment, often quiet and unnoticed, when the story you've lived stops defining you, and the story you choose begins. For me, that moment wasn't loud, it wasn't a courtroom or a microphone. It was a winter night, alone by a kitchen window, watching snowfall and realizing that the echo of truth travels farther than silence ever could. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You do not owe anyone the version of yourself they prefer. You owe yourself clarity. You owe yourself peace. And sometimes choosing those things means walking away, not with bitterness, but with grace. We live in a country that honors freedom of speech but struggles to embrace the cost of honesty, especially from women. But change doesn't begin in Congress or headlines. It begins in small, private acts of courage, like saying no, like telling your story, like refusing to sit at a table where your voice is just decoration. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to choose between being accepted and being true to yourself? What happened when you chose truth? Or, are you still standing at that crossroads now? If this story moved something in you, maybe reminded you of your own echo, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't speak to you, that's okay too. Let me know why. I'm listening. Most importantly, if you believe stories like this matter, if you believe quiet bravery deserves a spotlight, then please subscribe. Your support helps keep these voices alive, and more are coming. Until then, stay bold, stay grounded, and always choose the path that leads you home.